So hi everyone, I'm Andy.
I'm Alice.
And we are joined by another special guest today, Richie Maddock. Hi Richie, thanks for joining us.
Good morning, and thanks for inviting me.
No, thank you. You are very much a friend of MHR. We've seen you recently at a Disrupt HR event.
Yeah.
It's great to have you back here at Festival of Work. For everyone who isn't aware of you already, please could you kindly introduce yourself, your role and your area of expertise?
Not a problem. So Richie Maddock, founder and director of Lynchpin Associates. That is an organisational development and change consultancy who specialise on culture as the driver for all things as far as I'm concerned. So we focus on that.
Perfect. Well, that's great because that's exactly what we wanted to talk to you today about is culture. We've had a lot of actually, I'll be honest, Richie, we've been playing a bit of buzzword bingo around Festival of Work. We've been noticing there's a lot of kind of key phrases that like to be thrown out around there. So we've been jotting around to see how much they recycle. Culture isn't one of them that's kind of been repeated a lot, actually, which is good because I think it's incredibly relevant, but people aren't overusing it. But I don't know about you if you see a lot of these keywords being used in HR or a payroll field just recycled and then seem a bit kind of meaningless.
Absolutely, and I think the word you just used there, unfortunately, they become meaningless.
Yeah.
Because they become just a word as opposed to the meaning behind it.
Yeah.
So culture, I think, has become one of those academic, theoretical type things that scare people, to be honest. The complexities perceived scare people off it. It's fundamentally important. That's because it became a buzzword.
Right, okay. And you mentioned there the complexities that are perceived. Do you mind just explaining that a little bit more?
You put Google into, put culture into Google. How many pages are you going to get? There are loads of them.
Oh, endless, yeah.
And there are that many theories and that many. I'm another consultant talking about culture, but they're all talking about it in different ways. So it's very hard for the general user to actually get a handle of reality for them on what culture means to them, as opposed to what the academics say and what the theorists say about it. So I think there's a danger of making everything overcomplicated,
right,
as opposed to being able to use something.
Okay. And what does culture mean for you? I think when you're introducing the topic of culture to an organisation and why it's so important, how do you describe it to those organisations?
Well, there's a phrase that is commonly used, but it's the way we do things around here. That's it. It's not the vision, the values, the habits. It's just the way we do things around here.
Okay.
So there'll be a culture within MHR, and you'll do one thing and you'll do another, that come together to create a culture. But it's ultimately what I perceive as we do things around here, because that's what you two are doing. So if I was the new kid on the block, I'd be looking for you to say, well, how do you do things around here? What's the reality?
Okay. And do you do a lot of organisations that feel like they have an issue of their culture or are trying to identify what it is or are trying to correct behaviour? Are they trying to change it?
It's a mix of both, to be honest, Andy. And we always start with a fundamental question. First of all, I say we need to change our culture. We need to do this, that and the other. And we say, okay, change it from what to what? And that normally think, what do you mean to what? Well, you can't, in most things in your life, you plan it out. So why should culture be any different? So what culture do you want in order to be the best you can be to do what it is you've got to do? That focuses the mind on, well, actually, we don't need, there's a learning culture, there's a customer focused culture, there's a, well, what is it you actually need? Yeah, because everyone hopefully should be customer focused.
Yeah.
But do you want it to an nth degree, or do you need it to be more pertinent to those on the front line? Or you've really got to understand what culture is you want, and then from there you design it.
Right. And when we speak about if customers are wanting to change their culture, who is it that's asking that question or wanting that change to happen?
That varies, to be honest. And I've 9 times out of 10, though, to be honest, it's the chief exec. And that he or she driving the board. We need to do something different.
Yep.
Or it could be a member of staff that says it doesn't feel right. And if that member of staff is listened to, that's a good start. And then the work comes from there. But again, a lot of people fall across culture by accident. So they'll do a staff survey. Staff survey might tell you something needs to change, but it doesn't focus the mind on the culture. It focuses on the one particular subject that needs to change. and
Okay.
it's about looking at things in its entirety.
That's really interesting because we were talking yesterday about communication and how a better route to communication can improve a better employee experience and also support retention. And one of the topics that came out of that were holding more surveys, right, to understand how people feel about the organisation. But that was done on the lens of improving experience rather than reviewing culture. So, as you've just said there, like once a company decides that they need or want to go somewhere with their culture, what are the steps that they take to actually implement that? Like, how do you do that in a business?
Well, firstly, it's interesting what you say about communication. That a lot of people, and I stand by that. There's a lot of people that says communications need to be, but I would take it one stage further. It's about dialogue. Communication, unfortunately, nowadays is becoming very one way. It's transmitting messages.
Okay.
So you put it on notice boards, you put it on chat rooms, you put it on wherever you put it, even on text messages, but it's one way. And there's no dialogue. Dialogue encourages active listening. It encourages you to understand that the person's actually got the message. Yeah, and you can see from their body language and things like that. So in the quick, fast-changing world of work at the moment, we seem to have dropped the dialogue bit and gone very much for the speed. And that is communicating as opposed to dialogue. I always think the interesting question is, does communications need to be better? Or why is people not reading what you put out there? Because there's a lot that goes on, and you talk to people and they say, well, we put it on the internet. And then you go around to the people and say, well, I ain't got time to read the internet. And then you say, well, I put it on an email. Well, I don't get time to read an email.
Yeah.
And so there's no understanding that somebody's actually got the message
Right.
and feeling engaged as part of that.
What do you think are the blockers for that? Blockers is a corporate bingo word that you can tick off. Is it the channels that organisations are using to communicate, or is it the ability to welcome a two-way exchange?
I think it's the channels are one thing. The channels to communicate are sound, because if you just want to get messages out,
Yeah.
there are loads of ways to do it, and you do the way that suits you best. But in terms of dialogue, I put a lot of that down to time. People say, well, I haven't got time for that, but they haven't got time to talk to someone, but they've got time to send an email. And I think one of the worst things, and it's technology, one of the worst things about technology is the email forward button. So you're my boss, Andy, and you say to Emma, who's your immediate line manager, can you get this message over to Richie that I like him to do certain things? And you put it on an email, and what Emma does is just forward it. She doesn't talk to me. She says no. She makes an assumption that I've got the message and that I understand what it means and that I know what I've got to do. But everyone would agree that they've communicated.
Yeah.
But really, nobody has. They've just pressed a button. Nobody's spoken.
Okay.
Culturally, that cuts dialogue. And you do it continually across the organisation, you end up with nobody talking to each other.
Right.
Okay, brilliant.
Does that make sense?
No, it does, absolutely. I completely get it. And I suppose what we always talk about is like it's great to have technology to enable people, but it's got to be part of the conversation.
Exactly.
It's got to empower people to work smarter and harder together without replacing the elements. It's unburdening the things that are taking up their time, but it's also enabling them to connect more.
Yeah.
And we always say it, sometimes there's no sacrifice, there's nothing worse than actually removing the ability to meet face to face and connect as humans. Technology can support that, it shouldn't replace that.
It was interesting. I was with a room full of Gen Zs the other day, just talking about their experiences. And everyone to a penny said, we just want people to speak to us, Richie. Because there's an assumption that because we are the age group that we are, it all has to be social media.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, it all goes on social media. But you know what, Richie? I switch my living phone off when I'm in work, so nobody speaks to me. And I get home at night and I open the phone up and find out all the messages that should have told me during the day. So there's an assumption when we make these assumptions. And I think that comes through lack of dialogue, because you make assumptions based on what you think, as opposed to asking someone what they really think.
Yeah, I think that's something that Andy's I've brought up a bit in our podcast actually is don't assume. It's really important, because I think a lot of businesses think they know what employees want, or they think they know what managers need or the HR team need, but actually if you're not asking the questions, you're not getting the raw truth ultimately.
And all the buzzwords create that environment.
Right.
Because you run off to get the latest buzzword did you need it? Question.
Yeah, it's true. I wonder, Richie, with you said that obviously kind of there's a bit of a negative impact that technology can have on culture, but are there ways that companies are looking how technology can support culture and where they want to be moving towards?
I think the technology is the best bit is in gathering the information. What unfortunately some people have realised is that the software or whatever it might be, the technology, doesn't analyse as you would expect to analyse information. So in the world of perceptions, and you gather people's perceptions, that's depending how you see the world. It's it's not black and white.
Yeah.
And something you might say, well, my perception of this particular thing is negative, you might say it's positive. You do that by ordinary software analysis, you get loads of positives and negatives, but they're not necessarily in the right place. Because it's about, you might see it as negative, but there's a reason for that. You're having a bad time at work, you've got family problems, whatever.
Yeah.
And so really, tomorrow, it might be a different answer.
Yeah.
So it's putting that human element into all the information I think the technology can provide you. It provides you with all the stuff you need and more. It's what you do with it, and I think that's the human element that is needed.
Right, okay, really important. Are there other key influences that can help drive a culture?
Yeah, I'm a great one for unwritten rules. I believe they drive a culture. There'll be unwritten rules in the workplace all over that determine behaviours and determine our actions. And yet if somebody said to you, why did you do that? You say, well, no, I've no idea. But I've seen someone else do it. Or I've heard this is the way to do it. Or I always use the one in a meeting, don't put your hands up at meetings because nobody answers you. So as soon as you learn that unwritten rule, you won't ask any questions.
Okay.
And that stifles engagement and it stifles innovation and all sorts because you've been told or you've learned that when you put your hand up, that's not a good thing. So I'm not going to put my hand up in future. So it's the unwritten rules, I think, drive culture because there's enough policies and procedures and everything else that you can sack people over if you wanted to. But the unwritten rules that are driving behaviour, work with the police a lot lately. There's a lot going on about the case review of, and the misogyny and all the rest of it. And so there's a big thing about this. So how do you stop it? Well, it's stopping behaviour is one thing. Speaking up about the behaviour happening is another. The culture is such that I'm not going to come forward and say something because that's not the done thing. So I'll just keep quiet. That's an unwritten rule because the rules actually say we want you to get up and speak up. We want you to say something. But they believe culturally it's not a good career move or whatever the reason. So they don't.
Yeah.
And that's an unwritten rule that's prompting that behaviour and starts going through the business.
That's really interesting actually because I think if you come into as a new starter in the workplace, you think that your induction is what you're told about the company. It's like, say, the procedures, policies, but actually we probably pick up way more from our colleagues, our team,
Exactly.
and in the first week than kind of anything else that we are formally told corporate level.
Well, when you go home after your first day, you don't talk about the great health and safety policy. You talk
really.
You talk about how cleanly the kitchen is, and I'll never make a brew in there because it's so disgustingly dirty.
Or who I met and how I bonded with people.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It seems
What
like
they learn,
recognising your culture or the opportunity for where it needs to go, that you need to recognise there's a huge power in the individuals you have and the influence they have, right?
Yeah.
How do you leverage that then? So how do you come into an organisation, looking at it from top down or bottom up, however you want to look at it, and go, you've got some real linchpin personalities that are really driving where you're going. How do we leverage that and spread it around the organisation? What can businesses do?
The first thing is to understand the unwritten rules that are driving the place. So you need to, first of all, understand what you believe the culture is you want, consisting of what I call critical cultural characteristics. We need these 5 things in place that if nothing else, we get that 100% right and we manage it and we concentrate on it and we focus on it. And then you get people's perceptions about those 5 things. So, valuing their staff. Okay, so we'll put people out. So around here, when it comes to being valued, what's your perception? Well, I don't think anybody values me because I'm not high enough up the food chain. So you start getting all this information in and you realise there's some commonality. and then you can work on the commonalities. Because obviously somebody's created, or something, somewhere, has created this, and it might have been 20 years ago, but it's stuck in the business and we can't shift it. And then we then go and train cultural advocates, get them to understand culture in its practical sense, and then we want them to encourage dialogue with individuals, because we think that is the best way to solve culture. Not policies, procedures and handouts.
Yeah.
Go and talk to people. Why have you got this perception? Well, somebody said so and so. Well, do you realise if they'd have done it this way, which is what happens over here, it doesn't happen that way. Oh, I see. I didn't realise. So it's about a dialogue and having consistent conversations with people.
And is that the best way to review culture as well? Is keeping a dialogue, or are there any models or approaches that people can follow for, like, this is how regular we should be assessing culture and if it's going the way we want it to?
Yeah, well, there's a cultural assessment that we do is based on those. Once an organisation determines what its critical cultural characteristics are, we then regularly ask people's perceptions on those things. And if I ask you a certain question, you give me your perception, and I'll say, well, do you think that's having a positive influence on the organisation? Not so good. Or actually, I haven't got a clue, but I know it exists. That gives us some data to work with. And then you can say, well, actually, there's a big positive perception that everybody thinks about this. So that's a good move. But next year, when you do exactly the same and it goes down a bit, something's changed. So you need to find a balance between quantitative and qualitative information.
Well, that's a top tip there, actually.
It is a top tip. I was about to ask you if you say qualitative, quantitative information. If you were to give us any, like, two more, linchpin top tips for, like, this is how you can really pivot or impact your culture, what would they be?
Focus on connecting people, connecting top to middle to bottom and upwards and sideways, departments. A lot of organisations are big now, or they could be dispersed over a large county or whatever it might be. Make sure all the connections are managed, because otherwise people feel isolated. And culture you can't have a culture that fits one size fits all. All you can do is set out the song sheet and ask everybody to sing the song, but just in the way they see fit. So, for example, if I gave you Bohemian Rhapsody, everybody knows the words, but it's sung in so many different ways. It's classical, it's opera, it's rock, it's pop, but who cares, as long as you don't change the words, because the meaning of the song is the same. So if you have the cultural characteristics of an organisation that you've all agreed, everyone must be involved in that conversation as well, to say, I believe it's this. And then eventually you say, right, well, these are the 5 we agree, don't change the 5. And this is the language, that's the song we'd like you to sing. But feel free to sing it in a world that suits you, because the department that does your orders, they work differently to the ones that dispatch it, that fix it. They all do it differently, but just don't change the lyrics. So that's what we'd say, is understand the song. What's the song you want to sing for this business as a culture? And then make sure you never change the lyrics, but you can sing it how you wish.
I really like that analogy.
Yeah, I do.
I think it's a
Really
brilliant point
interesting.
to end on as well. Thank you, Richie. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
Hoping you're enjoying the rest of your day here at Festival of Work. Is there anything else you're looking out for today? Anything you want to discover while you're around at the festival?
I like ideas, as in, can I pinch you? No, to be honest, there's lots of good things happening in places like this. There's always an opportunity to learn.
Yeah,
No, thank
definitely.
you very much.
Thank you ever so much.
I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Take care.